Well, it looks like Facebook's working today, thank goodness. And hi,
Yeah.
I'm Ed Parcaut, your host of Real Estate Jerky and Real Estate Jerky Live. And today we have Mel Bradley of Mel Bradley was it electric,
Yes.
solar, what is it? What's the whole
Electric
name
and
there?
solar.
All right. And you were on the radio a couple weeks ago, but because I was out of town at different conferences, I wasn't able to have you come on Tuesday and go more in depth. And what a lot of people don't realize, when you're on the radio, we have an hour. We give you the bottom segments as a guest, and that only works out to about 20 some minutes. And then with the station ID and all the questions, you probably have about 13 minutes to talk. And I know you have a lot more to talk about than 13 minutes worth. So, excuse me, I wanted you back today to kind of go through solar, what's important about solar, what changes. I think we should start with the changes and why you want to look at it now versus waiting, because I think that's the most important thing. Then we can get into the rest of it. Does that work for you?
Sure.
All right. So what's changing with solar and why you want to get it done now?
Yeah. A lot is changing with solar, unfortunately, from my perspective. If you go back about 10 years, the state of California was really interested in promoting solar and getting homeowners to do solar and business owners to do solar. And for about 4 years, there was actually a state rebate along with the federal rebate when you put in solar. The state rebate went away. Solar kind of got jump started, which was the intent of the California rebate in the first place. And then solar, I think, much to a lot of people's surprise, just kind of took off. And it's become very, very popular now. About 40% of the power that's made in California is made by solar. I don't think the utilities and their unions saw all that coming. They never, I don't think they thought it would get this big and that there would be this much rooftop solar or in the system. And so they've now are before the Public Utilities Commission, sometimes referred to as the CPUC. They are the ones that make the rules for anything to do with electricity or gas or water or any of the normal utilities in the state of California. And they're in the middle of a rulemaking process, which is normally about a 6-month process from the announced we want to make some rules about and fill in the blank to actually having rules. And so we're kind of in the middle of that right now. And unfortunately, they're trying to change the rules to make them less attractive for homeowners and commercial enterprises to put in solar. And instead, they want to go in the direction, or they're trying to push in the direction of making the utilities or having the utilities install solar as large scale solar farms out in the middle of the desert somewhere. The argument is that this will make solar available to everyone, regardless of whether you're a big user or a small user, you're affluent, you're not affluent, whatever. And so that's what's going on right now. There's obviously a huge debate about it. To your point, Ed, if you're thinking about solar for your home or for your business, you probably ought to give it some real serious thought now, because it's entirely possible that by February or so of next year, the rules may be such that it will not be financially attractive for you to do that. So if you really are interested in solar, I would give it some serious thought
And
between now and then.
let me break in here. First, I want to go back to what your statement about how, they didn't think solar would take off. Well, you passed a law that said every new home had to have solar on it, right? And if you build homes, that means a lot of houses are going to have solar on it. I think the other issue was solar just all of a sudden became actually something that it was easy to put on a roof, easy to put, elsewhere, where before there were these huge solar panels that were heavy and, didn't work as well. I mean,
Yeah,
and when
I
you
mean,
have the government, I'm sorry, when you have the government subsidizing the cost and all the other stuff, who wouldn't take advantage of it?
yeah, two or three things in what you just said there. it's true that new homes right now in California have to have solar on them if they have been built since 2020. How that resolves in this tug of war between the utilities doing the solar for everyone and a homeowner doing the solar for themselves is up in the air. That point has been made a number of times that the legislature passed a law saying have to have solar on homes built since 2020. Not sure how that's going to work out with this new direction. The other thing that's happened is solar has gotten considerably less expensive over the last 10 or 12 years. I mean, when it first came out, it was very spendy and very pricey. And you really had to be a pretty big user in order to justify spending that kind of money and putting in a solar system. That is not the case today. Solar right now is probably going for about, I'm going to say, a third of what it used to go for when we first started in the business 10 or 12 years ago. So the price is like many things. You get into mass production and the price comes down. And so it's been an interesting ride.
Right. But the big thing that's changing, which you didn't bring up, is how they're going to. So like when we buy it from them, we get it at retail rates. And when they buy it from us right now, so why don't you explain what happens right now and then what is potentially going to happen?
Yeah. So the way solar works, obviously the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. And it obviously shines a lot brighter and a lot more hours in the summertime than it does in the wintertime. We all know that. So the way solar works now is you design the system on an annual basis. You design the system to make enough electricity to cover the electricity that you would use in a year. Okay. Now, and what that obviously means is in the summertime, you're going to be making more electricity or banking, basically, electricity. And in the wintertime, it's foggy, stormy, rainy, whatever, much shorter days as far as sunlight, you are going to use more electricity than you make. Now, under the current rules, and it's been this way since the beginning, everything is done at the retail level, meaning if you use a kilowatt of electricity, you're going to pay the retail price for it, which right now is somewhere between 25 and 35 cents, depending on your situation. And right now, if you make an extra kilowatt and you send it back to PG&E because you didn't need it at that moment in time, you had more sunlight than you were using, then you were paid 30 or credited 35 cents or whatever the rate was at that moment in time as well. So in shorthand, I call that a retail transaction. Anything you consumed, you paid retail prices for. Anything you exported or overproduced, you were paid retail prices. And basically, it was like a giant checking account. The money went in, money went out. At the end of the year, you balanced the account and somebody paid somebody some money. If you did it right, your balance would be zero, that you made as much as you used and you owed PG&E nothing. They will pay you if you overproduce, but they don't pay you very much, which is fine. The idea is not to be a power plant and make electricity for the neighborhood. That's not the goal. The goal is to make enough electricity for your consumption.
And
so
speaking
on changing that to where you will pay retail for anything you use, but they're only going to pay you wholesale for anything that you produce or send back to them. And those numbers, instead of being a 35 cent transaction that I was talking about before, becomes a 35 cent, more like 6 or 7 cent transaction. So it changes the economics so much that a normal solar system should, if it's done right, designed right, should pay for itself in 4 or 5 years. In other words, the money you would have paid to your utility will instead pay for the solar system over the course of 4 or 5 years. After that, you have free electricity. In this transaction, if we go to this retail wholesale thing that I would just explain, It'll be more like 20 years. And I think that pretty much means nobody's going to make that investment.
So it'll only be on the new homes, basically.
Yeah, and it's up in the air on how that's really going to play out as well. I don't really
They got to unpass a law. They got to unpass a law first.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because right now they're making us, and that was one thing why we put our plans in a certain time period so we didn't have to do solar, even though I want to do solar. But the problem is, and we can get into this, where the actual batteries aren't up to par yet, right? They're not where we want them to be, even though I've seen the commercials for Generac and all those things where, get those now and you don't have to worry about when the power goes out.
Right. And batteries really is a second subject that I wanted to at least touch on a little bit. One defensive move that consumers could make would be to install batteries so that when you're overproducing, instead of sending it back to PG&E for almost nothing, you instead would charge your own batteries, and then use that power that extra power that you were making in the when the sun was bright to consume when you're obviously not having a good bright sunny day. I don't think it's possible to put in enough batteries to where you could balance that on an annual basis. I mean, that would just be ridiculous. But you can do something with batteries by putting them in to at least get through monthly balancing and things like that.
Do you think it's going to change in 5 years? I'm sorry, Mel. Do you think that's going to change in 5 years? Like, how the technology changes so much?
That's what I was going to say. I think that much like the solar we discussed a little bit earlier, when solar was really expensive when it first came on the scene, I think that's where we are with the battery technology right now. It's very expensive to put in batteries. I do think with the focus on electric everything, whether it's electric vehicles or it's electric it's batteries for your home, I think battery technology is going to continue to get better. I think battery technology is going to continue to get cheaper. So I'm telling customers that to not rush out and put in batteries right now, because I do think the day will come when they're a lot less expensive to put in, and the technology may well be better, be able to store more power in a given space than what we can do right now.
Yeah, because I've seen those commercials. I've seen those shows like in building in Alaska, and they put solar up on the roof, and then they have like 20 different little 12-volt batteries, all huge car batteries, and daisy chained, I guess you call it. Yep. And they're going, wow, that's a lot. So, but I mean, I'm sure that's cheaper than a normal battery pack for your house, but we can't do that because they set the whole house up on only 12 volts, right? So they
what they do.
I'm not talking about here. I'm talking about some of those places. They set up the whole, even the refrigerator will run off of 12 volts, right?
Yeah, that's one way to go. The other way to go is to go ahead and, as you said, daisy chain the batteries. In the jargon, we hook them in series, so that if you take 10 12-volt batteries, for example, and hook them in series, plus the minus, kind of like you do when you put batteries in your flashlight, you'll have 120 volts. Okay. But each one will add to the other, to the other, to the other. So now across the whole array, you'll have 120 volts. That's the more common way of doing it when you get to the, say, a scale of a home or the scale of a small business. And then they make a device called an inverter that will take the DC power that the battery puts out and convert it to AC power, which is what your home wants to use in order to run your refrigerator or your lights or the TV set or whatever else. So that's the direction that I think things will go, is you'll have batteries, they'll be daisy chained to make some level of voltage, run it through an inverter, and then you'll have power in your home as you would normally have.
But I mean, that's a ways off. And that's, one thing I want to talk about also is, because you were saying that they want to do this so that people of all, walks of life can have solar, right? Well, why don't you just lower the price of utilities for everybody? You know what I mean? Then everybody would have it. I mean, because there's a rule of thumb that if, because I ran into this, I have a few people I know that have a 1,500 square foot house and they have solar on it. And they're like, if we would have known what we know now, we would have never put solar. And I'm thinking, well, Mel Bradley told me, unless you got a 2,500 square foot house and extra air conditioners, it might not make sense.
Right. Yeah. There's a number of rules of thumb out there. The rule of thumb I use today when I'm meeting with a solar customer is if their bill is not at least $3,000 a year, okay, then I don't recommend solar. The price of the solar the payback on the solar ends up being too long. It gets beyond my 4 or 5 year time horizon for an ROI. So if you've got a really small home and your bill's $100 or $200 a month or something like that, I don't think solar makes any sense for you. I really don't. But if you're one of these people that have $4,000, $5,000 annual bills, then yeah, solar makes sense.
I mean, because if you're running the air conditioning during the summers and you have a pool on a smaller house, you probably get 400, maybe for 4 months, right?
Yeah.
And then you get winter, and then guess what? Here in the valley, we don't. What is it? It's most people are on gas, and so the electric is not so expensive. So that kind of stuff. But I think it's just important to figure out if it makes sense for you to do it now before these changes go into effect, because we don't know where they're going down the road. And I think the other issue that came up here that a lot of people didn't think about is, they're finally thinking about is, a lot more people are getting electric cars, and we were thinking they're going to plug them in and they're going to charge more and we're going to get them. Well, now that's not, more people are doing that. So we need to make sure we still make money. Right.
Yeah. I think this is just my opinion. But I think the utilities underestimated the market for solar. I really do. I think they thought that this would be something that a few people would do in certain situations, but it wouldn't become kind of mainstream to where there's so much solar out there. And let me explain something on how utilities in California make money. They make money by building things, okay? And the way that works, if they put a pole in the ground, and let's say that pole costs $1,000, or they build a power plant for $1 million, it doesn't matter. It works all the same. They're allowed what's called a rate of return on that investment. So if they went out and spent $1,000 to put a new pole in the street, they're allowed typically around a 10% rate of return. So that means every year they get to collect $100 from customers for that pole, to pay for that cost of putting that pole in and then owning and maintaining that pole over time. So you can begin to see why they would be interested now that solar has really gotten popular. Climate change is becoming a big issue in this country and around the world. Electric vehicles are coming. I mean, you can see that all of this is pointing in the direction of more and more solar type technology and wind type technology. And I think they finally decided that they want to go out and build these really large solar power plants, for lack of better words, out in the desert was typically where they're going to put them, and invest millions and millions and millions of dollars and be able to add that to their rate base. Meaning they get to collect their 10% on that investment. Another big push, and they're powerful in this state, is the unions that represent the employees at all these utilities. They have finally figured out, in my opinion, that they're not doing the installation work, the construction work to build these large solar systems. And of course, they're not doing it on anybody's home. So they're missing out on all that work and all those employees, and they're not doing any of the maintenance work. These systems have to be maintained. They're like anything else. They need to be taken care of, and maintenance work is not being done by them. So the unions, the labor unions, and the utilities are making a really, really big push to try and get their foot in the door that they will be the ones doing solar going forward, not independent contractors and homeowners doing this kind of work going forward. So that's the hard, cold reality. Their argument, I mean, that's what's going on behind the scenes, in my opinion. Their argument is that it spreads the benefit of solar to everyone.
Well, I mean, you would think that, I mean, they need a scale in order to keep the costs down, according to that, right? Because when they make so much energy, right, electricity, and if they're going to sell it to people who don't have solar, they need to have a lot more people need it in order to get the cost down and keep the cost down. Otherwise, it gets more expensive. Correct? Is that what? Because that's one of the issues. We said PG&E, but MID and TID in our area, that's the same thing, right? They basically buy it back at the same right now at the same cost, kind of thing, or are they different?
Actually, the small utilities, the investor-owned the municipal utilities, so SMUD and MID and TID, et cetera, pretty much shut the door on solar a number of years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have very little work in those areas because they don't do the retail transaction. That's not their model. They instead are, if you're in the Modesto area, there's a huge solar farm out of North McHenry, and that's really MID's solar. Okay, that's where they get a big part of their solar, is from farms like that. Not, if you drive around Modesto, you don't see many rooftop solar systems on homes. You got to get out to the surrounding areas in the county or whatnot, where PG&E is the electric provider rather than MID or SMUD or anybody else.
I did not know that.
Yeah, that's why you don't see much solar as you drive around Modesto.
Right. Because I mean, you're only doing it to not have to pay, right? We don't get any credit for it, so you definitely want to have batteries or something.
Right.
And I also want to go back to when you said that the utilities didn't think that this solar would take off. I also don't, and I don't want to come off wrong here, but basically, I think when it was sold to the beginning to any and everybody at all, just to get them on roofs and to sell them as much as possible, I think that's what a lot of companies did in the beginning, to just make money, right? They did this and they put it on people's houses. It might not make sense. They didn't have the same ethics that you had. So you really got to be careful who's doing your solar.
Yeah, you do. I think a lot of the scalpers, for lack of better words, guys have pretty much gotten out of the business. That's not to say that you still don't need to be careful. I would definitely if you're at all interested in solar, I would get 2 or 3 bids, so that it's not any different than making any other major expenditure, putting in a swimming pool, a new roof on your house, whatever. It doesn't hurt to get 2 or 3 bids so that you have some level of comfort that, yeah, okay, I'm probably getting as good a deal as I can get under the circumstances. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody thought this solar thing was a little bit of I don't know, I'm dating myself, a hippie movement. And it turned out to be real. And in fact, it's turned out to it's something else we should probably talk about a little bit, Ed, is because solar has gotten so popular, it's actually changed the time of day that of when the peak power and the most expensive power is. In the good old days, it used to be that the expensive power, the peak was the load curve looked like a bell curve.
Right.
It would start off in the early morning fairly low, rise to a peak around noon, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 maybe, and then start falling off into the evening hours. So it would look like a normal bell curve. That's not what the peak looks like now. The load curve now actually, the load still does that, but now you've got this thing called solar that follows that. And so in the middle of the day, we're actually, as a state, exporting power at times to other states because we have so much of it. Okay, so much solar being produced that we can't even use it all here.
Hmm.
And once the sun starts to go down is when our peak is. So all of you may have noticed that are PG&E customers anyway, that if you haven't already been changed to a time of use rate, meaning what time of the day you're using the power matters, you soon will be changed to a time of use rate. And now the expensive power, the peak pricing is from 4 to 9 p.m. In the evening. And that's because the solar has come down, but the air conditioning load and the cooking load and people getting at home, turning on their TV load is still there. Okay. And solar's not helping that. And so now you're having to run your power plants in a pretty narrow window from 4 in the afternoon to 9 in the evening, something like that. So anything you can do, especially if you've been put on a new time of use rate, to change your usage habits. Don't be running the pool, for example, from 4 to 9 p.m. or drying your clothes or running the air conditioner for that matter. It's better to run the air conditioner in the early afternoon, get the house down a little bit temperature wise, and then kind of knock it off from 4 to 9 so that you're not burning that expensive power during that expensive time frame. That's a big change. That's not the way it used to be.
Mel, I'm sorry. I'm still using my air conditioning during that period of time. I don't care what you say. I'm still going to do it. There's no way I'm not going to have air conditioning at the peak when the temperature in Modesto peaks at like 5, 6 o'clock.
I know.
And then it takes forever to drop down. So there's no way. That's why we got a new air conditioning system. So I remember prior to us getting the new one and then going out, I mean, it would cost $600 a month, right? Because the thing's overworking, and then it would hit 100, and then the thing would stop producing as much cool, and it would get warmer in the house, right? And so finally got replaced it, and what a difference it makes.
Yeah.
It's important to have newer equipment, save money on it. All right, so what I was doing a second ago was getting your phone number. Is it the 765 number if somebody wants questions?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to put it on the screen if you're okay with that.
Sure.
All right. So Mel, you focus on ground mounted solar.
I do.
So you want to explain that real quick,
Sure.
What that is so people understand. So if they have any, but you still can answer other questions, but you focus only on ground mounted.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions, whether it's roof mounted, which is the traditional way of putting in solar, or ground mounted solar. Ground mounted solar comes in two flavors. I live in the county, in the more rural part of the area, so a lot of the people around me have a little bit of land, and so I got started putting in just ground mounted solar, which basically is just the solar panels mounted on the ground, as you might expect, anywhere from 2 feet to 5 feet off the ground, usually facing south. And that's what I started out doing. And then I had a customer actually ask me, is there any reason you can't put that higher in the air so that I can enjoy the shade? And in her case, it was actually shade for her horses. She had horses, and she wanted the panels put out in her pasture. And so we put them up in the air so the horses had shade. And that opened a whole window for me. This is a number of years ago, obviously. But people now, carports, patio covers, swimming pool patio covers, equipment on a farm, just park the tractor or the truck underneath them, those kinds of things. So all of that we call ground mounted solar, meaning it's not on the building itself. Couple of advantages to ground mounted solar is it's unfortunately here in the valley, because we get so much dust this time of the year with harvest and now with fires, the panels get dirty in about 6 weeks. If you think about leaving your car out in the driveway for 6 weeks and what it looks like 6 weeks later, it's usually pretty dirty. So the solar panels need to be cleaned, washed, and doing that up on your roof is one issue. Doing that on the ground is a much easier issue. So there's a couple of reasons or advantages to putting in ground mounted solar if you have the space or the need. but that's pretty much what I do. Yeah, to be quite candid with you, Ed, I'm a little too old to be bouncing off of roofs anymore. So I don't want to be up on a roof. I enjoy doing the ground mounted solar stuff. Makes my wife happy, makes my insurance company happy. So
No, I understand. I was up on my cabin's roof a couple of years ago and looking, going, okay, I'm too old for this, because if I fell off of here, not only would I take out that railing, as I hit it going down 30 feet, there's another 30 feet before I hit that propane tank. So let's just not be up here anymore. So
yeah,
I don't think it's worth it. We're not young like we used to be to jump off there and roll. Because I remember as a kid jumping off the roof at our place in Turlock. It was an old 2-story house, right? And I'd jump off the roof, no big deal, and roll, but not today. No, thank you.
No.
Yeah, and the one thing I want to bring up, what you just said, I didn't realize solar panels need to be cleaned, right? And so I could see how ground mounted is such a better way to do that, so you can clean them easier.
Yeah.
So, because you lose what, 20% when you don't clean them?
Yeah, obviously depending on how dirty they get, but yeah, you can lose somewhere between 10 and 20% if you don't keep them clean. So that, like I said, this time of the year, last year was a little worse because it really got nasty with the fires, and we were actually getting a lot of soot and smoke and carbon, that kind of stuff, to where we were actually having to wash them about every 4 weeks. But typically during harvest time, when they're out there harvesting the walnuts and harvesting the almonds and creating all the dust that we all see, about every 6 weeks is probably a reasonable cycle, which means you're going to have to wash them about 4 times a year with the rains that we're not getting these last couple of years.
Right, because is that enough, just the water hitting them to get that stuff off, or is there a certain way you should clean them?
No, you actually need to put a little elbow grease into it. I actually have found one of the best ways is to go out and remember the old push mops or brooms that they used to use in school, to push them up down the hallway, see the janitors with them, those nice big wide. Yeah. They work the best.
Shop class. Shop class. There you go.
Yeah, shop class. Yeah, they work the best because they have when you get them wet, they have a little weight to them, so it actually gives it a little bit of scrubbing action. Put them on a long pole and clean away.
Now, if you live,
them is not enough.
Now, if you live in the desert, they're talking about putting these panels in the desert. Isn't that sand going to mess them up after, when blowing the sand, hitting the actual solar panels after a while? The glass on there?
I guess I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, they do get some sandstorms out there, so I would think they'd have to think about that.
Yeah, I'm just surprised that, the ideal place, but what if we get a sandstorm? I can only imagine, But I'm sure there's some type of glass that repels, because they have all those sandstorms in the Middle East, right? And they have glass, so they have to do something, some of those buildings.
Yeah.
All right, Mel, I appreciate you being on today. Is there anything else you want to tell us before you go?
No, I don't think so. I think, like I said, I just want to underscore, if you're thinking about it, don't keep procrastinating. Actually give it some real thought, because I think the world could be very different for us as far as the economics of solar come first quarter, second quarter next year, somewhere in there.
Okay. All right, Mel, I appreciate you being on today. I want to thank everybody who showed up and was watching. And if you're watching this after the fact, just make a little comment that you were watching it. Again, Mel, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.